A very important concept that when we talk about classes is the constructor method, or the construction function, if you want to call it. Think as constructors as a special kind of function that we also have this in Java and C++ and C# that initialize the object for us with or without a given value. I mean, it's up to us, but think as every time we are making an instance of our object from an instance of our class, we are executing the function, the constructor, behind the scenes, even if you don't declare it. Like in the previous example, when we do create our object right here, behind the scenes in my class, we are executing the constructor, which is creating an instance for that class. But we can modify how this object creation takes place, okay? And the way we do this in Python is using the underscore init of the initialization. And in this case right here, what we are doing is we are saying that every time we have an object from the class myClassConstructor, this entire class is not a constructor, this method right here is the constructor, but just to make an example. And then we are saying that when we create our object, we want to have a specific behavior. In this case right here, we want to initialize two specific attributes. And what are those attributes? It's something that either it's going to have a default value, like in real, it's going to start as 1 and imaginary as -1. And we're going to take those values and we're going to put here into the object that it's calling or being instantiating with this attribute. So think as this, when we create our object, so our object is going to call this function behind the scenes, and it's going to create an attribute and it's going to plug the new value for real and imaginary. And an example why we do this, look in our previous example when we're working with a shared attribute between all the objects. In this case right here, if I create 10 objects, all 10 objects, they're going to access num as in the same reference. While in here, each object that is instantiated, it's going to have its own set of attributes. Different than other languages, Python cannot have multiple constructors, but we're going to talk about this in a bit, okay? So in this case right here, what we are saying, hey, we're going to create an object called constObject from the class myConstructor, and we're going to pass the values 42 and -42, and we're going to print it out those values, okay? And let's run this, and as we can see, when we print the new value for real and imaginary attributes, we have the new values which were passed when we create the instance of that class, okay? So if we go there and let's say now we won't pass anything and just see what happens. Since we're not passing anything, the default value for those attributes, they should take place, okay? And as we can see here, we have 1 and -1, which were the objects of these guys. Now, if we try to define another constructor, we might have some trouble. Well, first of all, if you're using an IDE, you'll see that's going to be highlighted already, and things won't work pretty much as you're expecting. Why? Because we don't have, in this case right here, since we are defining a new object, a new constructor for our object, we are just using real, right? But then we don't have the attribute imaginary when we call this print. So when we call this print right here, we don't have this attribute being defined because the last definition is the valid. So multiple constructors, they don't work pretty well. The best way to handle this is to have one constructor inside. You create some logic to say, well, if I just have real, execute this, and if I have other attributes, just execute another piece of function, okay? Things might be a little bit abstract right now, but later on we'll see some good examples how we can use class in our benefit, okay? So thank you and happy coding!